Good evening and thank you for joining us. The Thunder Bay Police Services Board has a new provincial appointee, filling one of the vacancies left after 3 members resigned last year.
It was announced today that Karen Machado is joining the board. The Red Rock Indian Band member brings extensive experience in the criminal justice system.
Seeing the challenges, being Indigenous myself and knowing the challenges that, my peoples have faced, I think I can bring a perspective from both lenses.
Machado is filling one of the openings for provincial appointees after Michael Power and Royden Pelche abruptly resigned in April. Machado retired in 2020 as a superintendent of the Thunder Bay Correctional Center on Highway 61. The police board calls Machado a strong advocate for diversity and inclusion during her career there, co-chairing a systemic and anti-racism organizational change committee. Machado says she'll consider all factors as she works to bring positive changes to the embattled police board.
I've read all the reports and I'm aware of the challenges, and I have my own ideas on what should be priorities, but really honestly, until I get in there and learn and work with the board and read and understand fully, more fully, the issues and challenges, I don't think it's fair at this point to really give any sort of priorities, because you need to go in there with an open mind and look at all the options.
Police Board Secretary John Hannam says he expects the government to announce the other provincial appointee in the next month or two. The city's representative, Georgianne Moroso, saw her term expire at the end of November, but she remains on the board until the city announces its appointee for the next term, which Hannam says should happen very soon.
Thunder Bay City Council received a report at last night's meeting which reviewed the efforts made to ensure voting in the recent municipal election was accessible to everyone. The review outlined an overall successful election, but did flag a few concerns that administration will look to address in 2026. Vasilios Bellos explains.
Under provincially mandated law, municipalities must carry out a review of accessibility measures after elections. Thunder Bay City Council received that report during Monday's meeting, which found as a whole, the city did carry out an election that was accessible for voters with disabilities, though there were still some improvements to consider for 2026. City Clerk Krista Power mentions a few methods that were new in the recent election that found success they plan on using again in 4 years' time.
Well, one of the big things I would say is, again, you see the free transit pass that was on our voter information letter. We got great response from that. We also had a number for folks to call for accommodation. And when we put that on, we thought maybe we'll get 5 calls, and over 70 people called to request accommodation. So we had to work with those individuals, determine what their need was, and then assess how we could best assist to get them to the polling station or to get the polling station to them.
The review did flag a few issues, including the need for more poll workers to receive accessibility training, something city officials say will be developed before 2026. During the recent election, only 4 city staff were trained on election-related accessible customer services. 2022 was also Thunder Bay's first crack at drive-through voting, which was successful, especially for those unable to stand in line at a polling station for extended periods of time. Clerk Powers says because of the positive feedback, it's a method that they are considering for the next election.
One of the first vehicles that actually pulled through was an individual who suffered from a mobility challenge, who had a walker in the back seat, who said, thank you, thank you, thank you. I didn't have to wait in line and I really wanted to vote today. So I would say from that perspective, certainly from an accessibility perspective, we would want to bring it back, but also just from the general users that enjoyed the opportunity to again register their vote with a paper ballot through the drive-through system. We'll certainly look to bring that back for 2026.
The recent municipal election also saw very positive feedback from many in the disability community regarding online voting, with it actually being the most popular method amongst all voters, more than 60% choosing that option. Vasilios Bellos, TBT News.
A rare winter road construction project is set to get underway soon. A busy section of River Street has been closed to all traffic since May 1st, when a sinkhole led to the discovery of a collapsed culvert. It took several months for city officials to come up with a solution. The new metal archway will soon be built over McVicker Creek.
We would expect probably late spring to be complete right now, again, depending on how the weather turns out.
The components were recently delivered to the worksite. Tyrannus Contracting won the $2.5 million contract to replace the culverts with a multi-plate metal arch mounted on concrete footings. Currently, a prefabricated pedestrian bridge has been added, which will be used to support all the utilities that will hang over the hole to avoid damage during the next stages. Vogrig says excavation began at the site yesterday, which will lead them to the next steps.
The intent right now is to get the site prepped and ready for pouring concrete. And then we'll play it by ear in terms of the temperatures to see when we're going to start pouring the concrete. Once we pour those concrete footings, then we can start rebuilding the new arch and start backfilling, right? So you can't really do any compaction when the soil's frozen either. So those are two things that get constrained by the weather.
Vogrig says with colder weather in the forecast, they might have to pause work temporarily. But if temperatures do rise again to near the freezing mark, they'll be able to start pouring concrete, which could push up the timeline.
Now to an education update about a battle for a deal for hundreds of thousands of Ontario teachers. The unions representing those workers say the talks could linger into the next school year. Siobhan Morris explains.
The other way around, where people are sort of...
They're negotiating separately, but for the major teachers' unions, their gripe is the same.
The pace is pretty frustratingly slow.
The union that represents public elementary teachers has just established what issues can be addressed in bargaining.
Normally, we would have been at this junction probably in October.
After contracts expired at the end of August, if the pace doesn't pick up,
then it is very probable that this will drag into the following school year. And it's a shame, really, because I think that teachers deserve to have, to know what their salaries are, what their working conditions are.
And what school life will look like for the next few years.
That causes some uncertainty for parents, but the fact that we're not at the strike vote stage should provide some reassurance that we're still providing what's needed in the schools and we're not at the point of having any sort of disruptions.
EDFO's president says they'll keep plugging away at a deal as long as possible.
If we get to a position where we're at impasse and we have to mobilize our members are prepared to do that. They're ready, they're waiting.
But stresses it's a discussion no one wants to have unless absolutely necessary. Education unions want more dates to sit down with the government to build momentum to reach agreements. The education minister isn't promising to add more to the calendar, but says negotiators are ready to talk.
We want to get on with getting these deals done and provide stability for children so they can stay in school, learn, and rebuild the skills that have been lost and the challenges that have been created as a result of the pandemic.
The government has previously said forcing a contract on teachers is not in the cards.
That was CTV's Siobhan Morris reporting. Dryden City Council has approved a pair of funding agreements with the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, which will see the community receive more than $3 million over the next 2 years. Chief Administrative Officer Roger Nesbitt recently spoke about the terms of the deal at a Dryden Council meeting.
That acceptance of the given funding does not constitute the municipality's community support for the APM project, nor the selection of the Township of Ignace as a final host community.
As a significant neighboring community, Dryden will receive $1.25 million in funding to continue to learn more about the potential nuclear waste repository near Ignace. Nesbitt says it takes a lot of resources to stay engaged in the process, both internally and externally, and keep Dryden residents informed. Dryden will receive another $2 million in near-term investment funding. That money is to be used to demonstrate to the community at large whether the project will be beneficial for Dryden.
We've leveraged the Learn More funding program now for approximately $2.4 million since about 2014. So it really has helped the community stay engaged, with this project, learn about the project. It's helped us develop, more community capacity and really develop some strategic planning moving forward. Whether this project does happen in our area or not, the benefits of this funding will be long lasting.
The NWMO plans to select a site for the nuclear waste repository in 2024.
The Ontario Autism Coalition has passed the torch to a new president. For the first time in the coalition's history, that role will be filled by a Thunder Bay area resident who hopes to make a big impact for kids with autism here and across the province. Mitchell Ringos reports.
Taking over the Autism Coalition's top position is Slate River resident Alina Cameron. She first started her journey advocating in 2017 when her daughter Fiona was diagnosed with autism. At that time, she realized there weren't many services or therapies readily available to her family. That frustration led her to the OAC. Cameron joined the board of directors in 2020, just as the pandemic was making things more difficult.
We were homebound during the pandemic because with developmental disabilities, like my daughter has, she cannot wear masks. She doesn't understand social distancing and basic hygiene, so we have to do all that for her. So now that we are back in therapy and back in school, she's doing much better.
Cameron spoke at a rally at City Hall that year, leading to 2 years as the OAC's Vice President of Research and 1 year as Northern Director. Now as President, she will be joining a cast of 20 directors. Cameron says one of her main focuses will be to highlight issues that are particular to the Northern region.
When you see issues happening in Northern Ontario, they're quite often early indicators of systemic issues that pop up later in larger urban centers across the province. So keeping an eye on things on the ground here often gives us a heads up as to what to look forward to down south.
Cameron says in Ontario, there are over 60,000 children still waiting for core funding, which is money that can be accessed for mental health supports, behavioral therapy, occupational therapy, and speech-language pathology. Cameron says this will be a big focus for the group as this program is needed now.
The access to therapy early on is extremely important for lifelong outcomes, for quality of life, not just for the child, but for their family and their whole circle of care.
Mitchell Ringos, TBT News.
While many people have been loving the warmer than normal winter we've been having so far, it has not been ideal for snowmobilers. The lack of cold weather has had a negative impact on many snowmobile trails across the province. Of the 30,000 plus kilometers of trails across Ontario, around 2/3 of them, seen in red, have not been open so far this season. Here in the Thunder Bay region, only a portion of the A Trail is fully open, while other trails are either closed or having limited availability. Officials with Thunder Bay Adventure Trails blame it on the mild temperatures, which prevent creeks and streams from fully freezing over. But with cold temperatures on the way, groomer coordinator Adrian Tessier is optimistic that will allow for the reopening of many more snowmobile trails in this region.
When you have a bit of a challenge and you work away at it and your heart is set in getting this challenge completed and looked after, we're to the point now we're starting to celebrate and say, yes, we've come to the hard stuff is pretty much over. We got a couple more hurdles to cross, but they're going to be simple compared to what we just went through. And we're all pretty ecstatic about the way things are going to be for us over the next couple of weeks. Hopefully we see a lot more people on the trails, and we just ask that you ride safe, ride sober, and ride responsible.
Tessier adds that most of the local trails have recently been packed and are ready to be groomed.